Today we're getting into the Golden Collection from Natasha Denona. I did pick up all 3 pieces. There's a lip gloss, there's a highlighting palette, and then also the Midi Golden palette, which I argue is the star of the show. So we're gonna get into it, okay? When I say it, I mean like everything. So use the timestamps down below. I'm gonna be giving you in-depth swatches. I'm giving you applications. I have 3 different eye looks that I did for this. I'm gonna compare this palette to other golden palettes out there from different brands. I'm also going to be comparing it to all the different Natasha Denona palettes as well, seeing what's similar. I already know there are some duplicate shades in here that are in the original gold palette, so we're going to get into all of it. I do have a code with Natasha Denona. It is affiliated, but it's LMB15. It saves you 15% off the website. So if after watching this, you decide to pick this palette up or anything from Natasha Denona, you can use that to save money. It's a permanent code, so you can use it anytime you want, whatever works for you. But as always, no pressure. I hope just to give you as much information as possible so you can make the best decision for yourself. So let's get into swatches first. The gloss in this collection is called the Golden Glimmer Gloss. It only comes in 1 shade, and this is a plumping gloss, so that is something to know. I mistakenly put this on my hand first before swatching other things, and I had a mark there from this, even though it was on there so briefly. There is some golden shimmer in here, but it's mostly like a clear gloss, glassy look. The highlighting palette is the Golden Highlighter Trio. There are 3 shades in here, and you can kind of use them however you want to. There is Pearl, there's Sun Glow, and Bronze, and these are very, very silky and creamy feeling to the touch. They have a very high shine finish, but you could use these kind of on the eyes, on the face, on the cheeks, however you want to use these glowy shades. And then last, this is the Golden Palette. This is like the main piece of this collection for sure. This is a midi-sized palette. It has 15 shades in it. 7 of them are matte, and then the other 8 shades have various sparkly, shimmery finishes. There are some repeat shades in here from the original gold palette, and I'll mark those with an asterisk, but we'll get into that more later in the video. Starting on the top row, the first shade is Maliko. This is a matte cream powder formula, and it's an off-white color. This is one of 2 of the cream powder formula that's in this palette. Next, we have Nubia. This is a sparkling foiled gold nude champagne eyeshadow. Next is Panna, and this is the other matte cream powder shadow, and this is described as a beige shade. And I would say it's a little bit more of like a peachy beige. Next, we have Aria, which is a matte, medium light, dusty sand color. Next is Fizzy, and this is a sparkling wet effect golden nude shade. Fizzy definitely has more of that kind of semi-opaque base on it, so it's not a fully opaque shimmer. Next, starting on the second row, we have Varus. This is a metallic medium antique brass color, and this is one of those metallics that has like full coverage on it. I actually find this could be, depending on how you shear it out, a little bit more satin, but it is not like a sparkly shadow. Next is Aura. This is a metallic shade, and it's like a golden ivory color. This one has a little bit of a flip on it, so it has that kind of golden sheen to it, almost how some highlighters go, and the base is like translucent slash slightly gray. Next, we have Teak. This is described as a matte medium dusty caramel, and I think that's a pretty good shade for it. It's one of the mid-tone mattes that are in here. Next, we have Kava. This is a sparkling champagne gold, and this is one of the really pretty shadows from the original gold palette, so it does have that nice sparkle to it. And then last on the second row is Sandstone. This is described as a matte medium ochre, and it definitely is that ochre color. It has more yellow to this brown than any of the other mattes in the palette. Kicking off the third and last row is Aurum. This is a metallic muted gold, and out of the 2 golden metallic shades in this bottom row, this one definitely has the least amount of like golden yellow, so I definitely agree with that muted description. Next, we have Log. This is the darkest matte in here, and it's a matte dark brown. Next is Oro. This is a metallic warm gold, and it definitely is that yellow kind of gold, and this doesn't have any sparkle either, so it's still that kind of metallic formula. Next, we have Flesh, which I don't love that name, but this is a matte light warm nude shade, one of the lighter mattes in here. And last, Alchemist. This is described as a metallic brass shade, and between the other metallics we've seen on this third row, this one has the most of like a copper feel to it, almost has a bit of an orange or like warmth that way instead of something yellow or muted. So that is the golden palette. It is very monochromatic. As you can see, a lot of the mattes, you know, look very similar to each other. A lot of the shimmers, you know, kind of all have these variations of each other, but you know, it's a lot of similar colors here for sure. Now that we've gotten in depth with the palette, I thought we would go through some comparisons. I'm gonna do the Natasha Denona comparisons first. Not only with the gold palette, I do want to compare these two, but also just with all the other Natasha Denona palettes that are out there, just so you can see what they look like, see if there's anything similar, even if it's not a re-promoted shade or the exact same. And I just think it's kind of nice to get an overview of what palettes look like next to each other. So let's get into those comparisons. Okay, for the Natasha Denona comparisons, I have a lot of palettes to get through. I have quite an encyclopedic collection, if you will, of Natasha Denona palettes, but I'm going to start with the gold since there are repeat shades in this palette. So obviously just looking at it, you can see the difference here of the original gold palette having more teals and just overall a little bit more color variation. It's not as monochrome as the golden palette, but let's talk about some of the repeat shades in here. The first copy going across is Aria, so I'm gonna have the top shade always be the original, and we did have Aria in the new palette as well. Mine has a little bit of hard pan. This happens to me. I try really hard to not let hard pan happen, but it does a little. So there are some swatches. I feel like overall pretty much the same. I don't know, there's actually a bit of a difference, to be honest, between those two, and I feel like especially with this new palette, the mattes kind of build on themselves, so they definitely like deepen up as you layer them. Okay, next here, this is Kava, and this is the original. Just a beautiful shade, one of the standouts for sure. And there is Kava in the new one. Texturally, Kava in the new formula, like it feels softer, but I do feel like they're pretty close. I know they don't necessarily look like it here. And the original Kava in the swatch is looking maybe a little less golden, but in person, I really do feel like they're so similar. It just is that this Kava, it's just a little bit more textured in a way, feeling. And when you get really close to it, I do think that there's a little bit more silver sparkle going on in this Kava. So not exact. I wish it could be obviously it. And I almost feel like there was an opportunity to just bring in new shades and not necessarily bring the old shades back. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about that. Okay, next, this middle shade, Oro. We also have Oro in the palette, which this to me, you know, it being in the center of the gold palette was so iconic because it is so golden. And off the bat, I can already tell you the gold shade in the original palette is brighter and a little bit punchier, and I would even say slightly more metallic looking. Like this almost looks like a duller shine, the new one, than the original Oro. So a little less saturated, I feel like, in pigment there. Next comparison, this is Log, the darkest matte, that's a brown. And then we have Log also in the new palette. There they are. I'm trying to make sure my hand is nice and dry. So Log, the original, and the new Log. I mean, they don't quite swatch the same. With the buildup though, I mean, it is very similar in color, but you can tell the formula is different. Then we have Varus, and this also is Varus. So original Varus and the new Varus. I feel like those ones look pretty similar, like if not exact. Next, this is Sandstone. Beautiful. This Sandstone. That one feels very, very, very similar. So color-wise, I think all those look very good, like as in matches. Next, we have Alchemist here, and then we also do have Alchemist in the palette. Now, to me, these do seem a little different. There's something about this Alchemist that has more of like a red base to it. I don't know what that is, or if this just somehow deposits pigment heavier, so you don't see the red base as much as in this new Alchemist, but very similar nonetheless, just really getting nitpicky about the differences here. Then we have the shade Teak, which we also have, it's the center shade in the palette. Both of these seem very, very similar. So those are both Teaks. And then last, this is Aurum, and we also have Aurum over here. And these definitely look different. So the original Aurum, I feel like, is more of a yellow orange gold. And there's something about the new one that's a little more antiqued feeling. Like it has a little bit more olive almost to it, or a green tone, so it's not as orangey. Very slight again, but definitely different tones. And I actually prefer the new one compared to that. So those are the comparisons of the exact shade replicas we're finding in the new palette compared to the old gold palette. I will say I'm so sad that some of the best shades, like honestly, I love lime chrome and brass so much, and I really wish that they were included in this new golden palette. I think it really would have added such a nice spice to the gold palette. And I mean, you could get stuff like this, I guess, from the Yucca palette. There's a chartreuse in that. There's also a limey green in the pastel palette. So there are other palettes, but these just offer something fun yet still neutral. And we didn't really see much duochrome in this palette. I'd say the closest thing we have is the Aura shade, which is kind of similar to Sparks. Like they have the same flip, but they are not the same finish. So Aura's down here. This is the one in the new palette, and it's just a kind of gold silver flip almost. And then Sparks has that same thing, but it's so much more beautiful and sparkly, just stunning. And I don't have a ton of problems with the formula in here. I think the sparkles are fine, but I do think there's something a little bit more special to the sparkles that were in this palette that really made me fall in love, specifically Kava, Lime Chrome, Brass. So just some thoughts if I'm sitting here directly comparing the two. Hopefully that's helpful for any of you guys if you wanted to know. If you have this palette, I really do think you're fine. Like, I don't know, unless you want multiples or you like the midi size, because you can take the midi shadows out and move them around, and I do love that. And it's pretty obvious they're phasing out these larger eyeshadow pans, which I'm happy for. This is $69. This, when it came out, I think was like 130 or so, right around there. So I definitely prefer the price point of the midis. The other palette I actually find kind of similar to the gold palette, but less shadows, is the Face palette in Light. This has some more golden tones. They're just more warm, I guess, but I just like these tones a little bit more, and I feel like matte wise you get some similar selections. So like when I think of everyday what I'm using, I'm a little bit more drawn to these, but anyway, I guess they're not that similar. Like even the lighter tones definitely have more yellow gold going on. So again, not exactly the same, but for me, kind of a similar vibe. All right, now I'm gonna run through palettes and just show you them next to each other. I feel like that's helpful just to have them right next to each other, the same exact lighting compared. So here we have the I Need a Nude compared to the golden palette. And really, I don't see anything that I think is similar. So I feel like you're pretty good on this one. No repeats between them, but they're both very monochromatic, so that's why. Okay, I zoomed this in even closer, so hopefully that's helpful. But if for some reason you are wanting a comparison between the golden palette and the Xenon palette, here you go. No comparisons, nothing similar. Next here is the Glam palette, and I actually feel like there are some similarities. So Center Eyelid, what a color name, I don't know, and Arium are very similar. So this is the Glam palette and this is the golden palette. For the Glam palette supposedly being such a cool toned palette, you can tell here, like, why is there a golden yellow shade in it? Other than that, I mean, the matte brown here, it kind of looks similar. I mean, I'm not gonna compare all the matte browns because honestly, with Natasha Denona, there's a lot that are very similar. Okay, let's get real. I'm sorry if you really wanted that, but they just deepen up depending on how much you layer them. So that kind of adds an element to how close you can get them or not. So anyway, I really feel like this is the closest shade to anything in here. Next, we have the bronze palette, and I feel like true bronze, I don't know, it could fit in the golden palette at some point, but it's not, because this is a little bit more orangey. I guess Alchemist, you know, it's less orange for sure, but maybe there's something there with that one. Otherwise, I really don't see it. Even Silk, I don't know, it's more close to true bronze in its own palette, which, I mean, this is Natasha Denona signature here. The bronze palette, so many similar shades. Gold palette, also so many, I feel like, similar tones within the different shimmers and everything. So it's probably what we should just expect at this point, but not too many real, you know, crossovers here. All right, next we have the Zendo palette. Really, luster, I guess, could fit in here, but there's nothing this orangey at all in the palette. So really no crossover on this one. Even the matte browns have different tones. Next, this is the Love palette. And again, I feel like there's absolutely absolutely no crossover in this one at all. Even Lifetime, it just doesn't work. I honestly wish there was a shade like Lifetime in there because I think this one is so pretty, but there's nothing comparable. Next, we have the Sunrise palette, and there's a few shades. There's Agate here and also Day Spring that I feel like have golden palette vibes to them, but even those, there's nothing quite like it. Like Alchemist is different, so nothing actually comparable there. Next we have Retro Glam, which is completely different. Lots of cool tone greens and olive colors, like no comparison. Next is the My Dream palette, and there's nothing quite in here, although I feel like there are some golden elements of this palette. I don't think anything really compares at all. All right, here is the Yucca palette, and again, I really don't see much. Maybe Valley could be similar, but it has a little bit more, I almost feel like yellow in it than teak. Really, Plantasia is the one that I feel like could be lime chrome, or maybe brass actually. Brass from the gold palette. Let me just do it right now. Here's brass. Okay, not the same, but similar. And then this is lime chrome. So Plantasia's in the middle. I don't know if this is in focus. I'm sorry if it's not, but not quite the same as the other ones because brass doesn't have as much of like a red base on it, but still. Otherwise, there really aren't any other comparable shades at all. All right, next here, this is the pastel palette, and again, nothing in here. I guess you could say Limoncello is the closest, but it's a light yellow. Nothing's like that in the golden palette. I think this is the last true midi palette, and this is the retro palette. And again, this has way more mauves, cooler tones overall, some reddy maroons, so this definitely doesn't have any crossover. I guess before we get into bigger palettes, why not just throw in this face palette? This came out earlier this year. I didn't love it necessarily. And there's nothing that similar. Actually, Everyday, I guess kind of looks like Varys. This has almost like a baked, you know how Tom Ford shadows are? It has more of a feeling to that than the formula of Varys, but also tone-wise, very different. This looks more minky. This one has more of that yellow, olive kind of bronze going on. Okay, I feel like these next few, I don't know how available they are because I feel like these style of palettes are getting phased out, but I knew that the Metropolis palette was gonna have a lot of golds in here, and it does. So we have this kind of yellow gold, which is kind of similar to Oro. This one is more olivey and like antiqued and kind of dirty and has more of like a blackened base on it. This one here, I don't know, maybe it's like Alchemist. This one's called Blaze, and this one definitely has, even if the color's kind of similar, texturally, this has more kind of pieced out sparkle to it. Otherwise, even these kind of golden shades have more orange to them. They're more like saturated, and I feel like maybe even could look more like the bronze palette in some ways. So otherwise, I don't feel like there's too much else, but a few of the golds in here, if those are the only shades you're really looking for, maybe you could make those work, although there are differences. Next, this is the Trio Chrome. I really don't see much of anything. There's nothing in here that's similar. Okay, next here's the Biba. I really feel like Rustic could be like Varys, but they're not. They're not the same. Rustic has more of a blackened base on it, so I don't find those necessarily similar. And then Shine, I feel like it's a beautiful color. Maybe it's kind of like Fizzy, but it's actually not. Texturally, Fizzy has more shine and sparkle to it, and it's also a lot more golden and kind of warm overall. So not a ton of comparisons. Maybe this freckle color could be similar to some of the browns in here, but that's kind of it. Last for kind of these types of palettes, I have the Circo Loco, which doesn't have any similar shades in it. And last, I don't know how helpful this actually is because, again, I don't know how available these older palettes even are, and to be honest, I think just if you haven't bought these yet, I just say go with the new formulas, go with the new palettes. You don't need to like grab these. But I guess this shade, it's called Cool Bronze, which I don't necessarily agree with. And then Aurum, they have a similarity for sure. They're not the same. This one's a little more yellow golden, but again, very, very similar. And I believe that's the green brown palette, and this is the purple blue. Was that what it's called? And this is a lot cooler, so there really aren't any golden type shades in here. So, oh my gosh, I think I covered most of the Natasha Denona palettes out there. I have a lot of them, so I hope that was helpful. Just even seeing palettes next to each other, you know, what might look similar or not. I hope that helped you out if you have a large Natasha Denona collection, or we're just kind of wondering what these shadows look like next to the rest of the Natasha Denona palettes. All right, the comparisons don't end there, guys. I went through my collection. I found every gold themed palette in my drawers, and it wasn't that much. Gold is not the color I go for really, but I thought I would compare to some of these other popular palettes out there, or even if they're not the most popular, again, just ones that are out there that exist. And if you're into a color story similar to the Natasha Denona golden palette, if you're looking for other golden tones, maybe these will give you some inspiration. Maybe these are something to look into as well, or maybe you have one of these and maybe the Natasha Denona palette isn't a need for you. But either way, I thought I would compare them, so let's get into these comparisons. So opening up the golden palette, I thought we could compare it. I only have 5 options here, so not a ton of other palettes from different brands, but I think the palette that was most requested is the Ambiance palette from Sigma. This is also very golden, but as you can see here, or at least I feel like I can see, I think there's a little bit more range in the Sigma palette. Even if we just look at like these shimmers that are in here, I just feel like they look different. I guess they don't necessarily look that different. Like, it's a lot of the same things. These are all kind of a rosy golden hue. These are both bronze. This is the yellow gold, so it's actually kind of the same. And these have a little bit more of a satin finish to them than some of these having the metallic, some of them having something a little bit more sparkly. Really, the only sparkly shade in this one is Marigold, which there's no counterpart to that, I feel like, in the Natasha Denona gold palette. Even just looking at the different mattes that are in here, I feel like, and again, maybe I'll get played once I swatch them all out, but yeah, I guess they're all kind of similar, although different tones. Like, there's no red brown in this palette. Teak would be the closest to that, and it's not even close. So I don't know, I feel like these are pretty comparable in a lot of ways. If you have one, you probably don't need both. They have differences here and there, but pretty close. Next here, this is the Huda Empowered palette, and again, it does have some of these really yellow golds, which I feel like, you know, remind me of the gold palette, but this is just definitely different. First, these golds are so similar from the Huda palette, like technically different, but so similar. And I feel like nothing has this foiled of a finish in the Natasha Denona palette. Like, even Nubia, which is one of the most sparkly shades in here, it's just not the same. These are a little bit more chunky. They're a little bit more glam in a way. This has a softer glam kind of look to it. Kava is stunning, but they're stunning in different ways. I wouldn't say one's necessarily better. You are getting a lot more color variation though in the Huda palette, and there's a lot of mattes in here as well and a little bit more depth too. So that's it compared to the Huda Empowered palette. Next, I just have a few quads, and none of these are necessarily going to be like super cheap options. I mean, Sigma is going to be the most affordable here, but the Rowan quad is quite expensive. This Tom Ford quad is also expensive. I mean, it's Tom Ford, but I just thought I would showcase them. So this quad from Tom Ford is called Suspicion. I actually got this at a CCO, which is a cosmetic company outlet, so I was able to get it for, I felt like, a really great price. And to me, this is kind of enough golden shades. Like, these aren't necessarily as yellow as some of the stuff in the gold palette, but they're all shimmers. They all have that kind of baked satiny finish on them, and I think it's stunning. You have some depth from this shade, so I don't know, if you have this and you don't wear a ton of golden shades, it might be enough. This next quad from Sigma is the Creme Brulee quad, and this has 2 mattes and that really beautiful gold. If you're just like, I want one really yellow gold that's just stunning and foiled, maybe this is the quad for you. Like, it's so pretty, and it really does feel like the distilled version of the golden palette. Like, if you had to just take a few things and create the essence of the palette in a quad, I do feel like that's what it would be. So I think that one's a good option potentially if you just want a smaller selection of shadows, and these ones work for you. And then last here, and honestly probably one of my favorite golden palettes I own, is the Gold Lust palette from Rowan. These are mostly creams. There's one powder shimmer shimmer, this one here, the last one. And this is a more subdued gold, so you're not getting like yellowy golds in here. But I think that's why it's a little bit more wearable to me and why I really enjoy this palette. Every time I wear it, I think my eye look looks so sultry and just pretty. And so it tends to be the gold I go for, but you can see how different it is, I feel like, from the palette. For example, just swatching a few of the golden shades in the Natasha Denona palette. Nubia kind of works with like that first shade there, but I definitely feel like it's warmer and more yellow overall. So those are some of my gold comparisons from other brands out there. Hopefully, I don't know, any of that was helpful. Finally, for some demos. I do have 3 different eye looks, so let's get into those. For the first look, I wanted to do something every day, but I also wanted to get a lot of different shades on my eyes, but still simple. All of these are gonna be simple. So I did a little bit of eyeshadow primer, and then I went into Malika so I could just lay a little bit of that base down. That does add a brightness to my lid. I just wanted it to kind of overall even out. Then I went in with Flesh as a crease color. Very light. I definitely didn't want to add too much definition. I don't do that for every day really. Then for the lid and kind of the main shadow of this look, I went in with Nubia, but you could choose any lid shade that kind of works for you in here and just kind of swap it out. But Nubia has like a nice amount of sparkle. It's semi-opaque. You can build it up and it sheared out really nicely. I added a little bit of liner and smudged that out. Then I went in with my favorite little small angle brush from BK Beauty, the 208. I went into Log, the darkest matte, and just added a wing so I could have a little bit more glam. This is definitely still a look I would do every day, but it's a little more on the glam side for me. I added some mascara. I decided to add a little bit of Aria on my lower lash line just to add the tiniest bit of definition. Lately, I haven't been putting much on the bottom lash line, but sometimes that little bit of shadow just helps add a little definition. And then I used the highlighter in the lightest shade to add a little bit of shine to my inner corner and brow bone, and I think the look is so pretty. I think it's really simple, really brings out the blue in my eyes as well, and definitely is one of those kind of everyday looks I would do with the golden palette. All right, for the second look, I wanted to do something that was glam, but it's still a single shadow look, so there's something very achievable and easygoing about it. I started off using a cream shadow as an eyeshadow base. I do this a lot, and I just used the Hourglass Prism shade you guys know I love. I blended that out, and then I took a pinched fluffy brush is what I call them. The one I have here is from Sigma, the Diffused Blend E24, and I went in with my main shade Veris. I started close to the lash line and just started blending that shadow onto the eye, and as I had less product on my brush, I would bring it up so I could get that diffusion in the crease and have it blend out really nicely. I put that everywhere though. It was the one shade I really used on my lid. I also took that under my eye and put it on top of that cream shadow that I also put down there. And I mean, that's the look. This is a metallic, but as you can tell by blending it out, you're not going to get that necessarily foiled metallic unless you really pack it on. And I find it's just more of a wearable look to do it in this diffused way. I added a little bit of the highlighter onto my brow bone, and then I decided to go in with Aura for my inner corner, which has a little bit of that gold sheen to it, and I felt like it wasn't too much, especially since I was only doing that one shade on the lid. So that is the look. Added some mascara. It's simple, but since it's a little bit darker on me, it still has this glam aspect, I think, and it also still brings out the blue in my eyes, but I would say this is one of the golden shades that's the least warm, or that has like the least yellow and kind of golden orangey hues to it. So I like that about it. I thought it gave a little bit of variety, and it's one of the shades that I'm drawn to since it's not so warm. But that is the second eye look. All right, for the last look, I really wanted to spotlight that really yellow golden shade. It's the golden palette, so I wanted to do something with it, but I also wanted to do it in a style that I felt really confident and comfortable in today. So as much as it's bold, I also think there's a simplicity to it, kind of the running theme. So I started with some primer on my eyelid, then I went into Fizzy. I thought, okay, maybe I'll put Fizzy, and you know, it's just not my favorite shade. There's something about the sparkle in this one that just kind of is dulled out. It doesn't shine the way I wish it did. So I did initially put that down, but then I went in with Panna with a big fluffy brush and just kind of blended out the edges, and it started blending it away. So I just kind of put that all over my lid and went for something a little bit more matte and just kind of subdued on the overall overall lid. Then I went in with Oro, that yellow golden metallic shade, and I knew I wanted to put that on the inner corner. I kind of dragged it along the lower lash line as well on that inner part of it. And you could do whatever you want. If you just like something spotlighted right at the corner, if you like something more just on the lower lash line, you can kind of play with it however you want to, but I did a little bit of both. And this yellow on me is just a little dark on that inner corner, so just something to keep in mind, but I still like it. I think it's impactful. It's something a little bit different. And then I went into Log, again with that angled brush, added a wing. I just thought that kind of finished out the look, added some more structure to it, and then added my mascara. So that is the final golden look. I really like this one. I think pops of color like this can be a really great way to keep your look low-key still, but there's definitely the vibe of like, I love makeup going on my eyes right now. Like, you can tell I'm into makeup if I'm wearing this type of look, even though it's not like heavy, it's not like a ton of shadow. And again, for where I'm at right now and the looks I'm liking, I feel like this definitely still fits the vibe while also being a little experimental. So that is the third look. We are finally here for some final thoughts, some reviews, all that after you've gotten all the swatches, all the information. What do I think about this collection? I'm gonna start with a gloss. I was really excited for this when I pulled it out of the packaging. It was just so beautiful. I didn't expect it to be so pretty. I was most excited for the palette in this collection, and I just got the other things because I thought it'd be nice for the review in case anyone was looking at them. But I have to say, unfortunately, I can feel the little glitter particles in here. Now, I will say for some reason, the most prominent feeling of them was that first time I wore it, and that was so disappointing. But I will say, as I've worn it more, I don't notice it as much, but it's still there. So if you're super sensitive to feeling the actual glitter particles in your lip gloss, I do get that from this. So be warned there. You guys know I'm pretty picky about that. So it's not a must-have. Like, if I could go back, I don't think I'd purchase it, but I don't know if it's so bad I'm gonna like immediately declutter it either. The actual formula is nice. I think it leaves nice shine. I don't mind the plumping, and it kind of has a bit of a minty, yet for some reason I get almost a coconut or almost a vanilla with the mint. So I think that's kind of nice, but if you don't like a minty product, this might not be for you for that. And again, it does plump. It's one of those ones where when I put it on initially, I didn't notice it, and so I, had no idea, and then it kind of slowly came through and you could feel the blood really in your lips. So it's a little painful if you lick around. If it gets on your tongue, like, it's gonna go there, but I don't find it lasts forever, and I don't mind a lip plumper personally. So I feel like this one for me is just mid, and the biggest downside on this one for me is just that I can feel the glitter. I just personally really don't like that if I can help it. Now onto the highlighting palette. I find this as likable as any face palette, whether it's a blush palette, a highlighter palette, a bronzer palette. Like, when you're getting a palette of products, you're inevitably gonna get things that might not work for you 100%. Whereas if you're just buying that one shade that works, it's gonna be more likely to get used. I will say the tones in here, I feel like you could use a lot of different ways. So if you feel like this is something that you would get a lot of use out of, it might be worth it to you, but it is expensive. It's $55. The formulas are nice, super silky, super buttery, not as creamy as the new Natasha Denona highlighters that have come out. Like, it's not an actual cream, but very buttery and silky. It's nice. I get it for the collection. I'm not necessarily obsessed with it though, to be honest. Like, again, I could leave it, to be honest. As for the palette, so far quality wise, I really don't have any issues with it. The only shadow I don't really love is the fizzy shade. I just find the sparkle on it kind of reminds me of some of the MAC shadows I've used in the past, in that they seem like they should be shinier than I feel like they actually turn up on my eyes. So that's like the only shadow so far I've really had any issue with. So really, you have to decide, are you a golden girly? Are you someone who is gonna get a ton of use out of these tones? And if you are, I think this could be a really great neutral palette. You have to be okay though with a monochromatic palette. And I feel like this palette will be best if you're someone who uses these types of golden tones, these brown tones super often. Like, this is your daily go-to. I think you're gonna get a lot of use out of this palette, but I've found it's very monochromatic on me personally. And also, I've just noticed that the golden shades in here definitely, they show up on my eyes. Like, on my skin tone, even the lightest shades in here still show up kind of orangey, and like, they are definitely present. Even if they're a little bit lighter, the tone of it is a little bit more stark than like super natural, especially for what I've been loving lately, which is like the I Need a Nude stuff. So when I look at at it that way, and the fact that it's all golden like this, there are so many lid shades in here that I feel like are pretty redundant. Even the mattes that are in here, I feel like are a little redundant. It's not the perfect neutral palette for me. I am more an I need a nude girly, and this is also redundant. This also has a ton of the same similar shades, but these are the same similar shades I actually wear. So in that way, that's why this works for me. And I feel like if golden shades are what you're after and get that same kind of use from you, then I think you're gonna love this palette. That being said, definitely not a bad palette, just not quite my taste as much. And for that reason, I just think a smaller selection of these types of tones works for me a little bit better than the 15 shades that are in here. And I feel like some of my other options that I showed, the golden palettes, I think those might work for me a little bit better. But out of the Natasha Denona line, I feel like the face palette, the Glam Face palette, I have the light version of this palette, but to me, these tones give me everything I kind of need in the golden palette in one kind of travel to go 5 shade thing. Like even the 2 shimmers that are in here, I feel like are kind of repetitive, and we could, you know, get one of those out and put a different golden color in here and then have even more variation within just 5 shades. But to me, I definitely think I could get what I'm looking for in here without the bigger palette. And at this point, I feel like we've seen the Natasha Denona palettes like this, like the bronze, the I Need a Nude, the golden palette. They've had that kind of redundant quality to them. So it's just kind of how she does some of her monochromatic palettes. Like they are monochromatic, okay? They are mono one. And kind of leaving it off, I did want to mention, like, I think that the gold palette, the original, is just iconic. And to me, it represents the time it came out, you know, like neutrals, but we were getting more colorful. I feel like bolder looks were in, and I just think there's so much here. It has so many golden shades, and again, so many of the shadows that are in here are in the new palette. So it has a lot of that redundancy, but the pops of teal and these really fun, like duochromes, the lime chrome color in here, as well as brass, I think just added some spice. And I'd be lying if I didn't say I was sad to not see at least some call to that. I wish we at least got some of those limey duochromes, even if we weren't getting full-on blues and teals in here. I would have loved that. I really would have. But neutrals are very much in right now, even just light eyeshadow looks in general, when I think of like the overall trend of how people are doing their makeup. And so in that way, I do think this one is a little bit more of the times today than the original palette, but I think this still would have been fun with a little bit of a switcher. Like a few of these could have been something a little bit more fun, but let me know what you guys think in terms of color story. If you've picked this palette up, let me know how you guys are liking it. I do think it's a good release for summer. Those golden tones definitely make me think of vacation, but I'm gonna leave the video here. I really hope this video was helpful if you were on the fence, if you really wanted some deep dives into the colors and comparisons and swatches and looks and all that. I hope this gave you the information you were looking for or needed. But other than that, I will see you in my next video, guys. Bye.